about the ecological role of soundscapes is Alice Eldridge. Hi Alice. What is the ecological role of soundscapes and how can this research be applied?
Well, I'm working within the emerging discipline of ecoacoustics, and within this frame, we see sound as an ecological resource. So like food or habitat, we think of sound as an ecological resource. Examples of what our data is, these are our soundscapes. So there's some recordings from reef systems. And a lot of our work has been done in terrestrial ecosystems, in forests. Soundscape then is a source of information about the ecological status of that ecosystem. And with contemporary hardware and a bit of maths, then we have potential for a cost-effective ecological monitoring tool. We're really familiar with the idea that animals make sound, right? The discipline of bioacoustics has studied kind of individual calls between birds and insects and bats and even more recently fish and whales. But we now understand as well that not just these individual calls, but the soundscape as a whole. So all of the emergent sounds in a particular place are also kind of key ecological information. These soundscapes themselves are important kind of ecological information, if you like. So a frog chorus by a pond might be used as a cue for other frogs to navigate towards that potential site as a potential site for reproduction. Or it might be used by some migratory birds that are trying to maintain a particular route, as towards a breeding territory, for example. And it's not just the animal kingdom that makes sounds, right? Flowers respond to pollinator sound. Within minutes of a bee buzzing past, they increase the sugar concentration in their nectar. And we know also that plants emit information when they're stressed. They emit airborne sounds under stress. So the application then is we switch this round. We can say, if sound is central to staying alive, then we can listen to the sounds of being alive, if you like. At the simplest level, we have unintentional sounds. So we can listen in soil and we can hear worms and beetles moving around. We can listen in reefs and we can hear the crackling of cavitation bubbles of snapping shrimp, or even pondweed. In evolutionary terms, if we think sound is essential to survival, then organisms need to be heard. And so just as we have niche partitioning, we're familiar in ecology with the idea of a niche in terms of our habitat or the food that we eat, we also have acoustic niche partitioning. And this leads to this idea then that a higher biodiversity will have a higher kind of acoustic diversity, right? And then using machine listening tools, using computational analysis, we can analyze those soundscapes and get some sense of not just the individual species, but the kind of community as a whole. So to focus in on some of the work we've been doing at Sussex, some years ago now, back in 2014, I was working with a brilliant conservation biologist, Dr. Mika Peck. He works in frontline communities in the Amazon or in Southeast Asia, working with local communities at the front line of climate change. So he's interested in cost-effective tools for biodiversity monitoring. Now, we can use satellites, we can use remote systems, right? They're more cost-effective than humans, ecologists going in and measuring things on the ground. The problem with satellites is obviously light is blocked by the canopy or by the soil or by the sea. The good thing about sound then is that sound is omnidirectional. We can listen in all light levels, and we can listen below the canopy and below the earth and below the water. The first work we did back in 2014 was to ask the simple question then, if we record the soundscapes across woodlands and forests of different ecological status, we'll see a gradient of species diversity, the difference in birds. Can we analyze the soundscapes and use that to predict the species diversity, the species richness? And what we found back in 2014 is that we could do that with surprising accuracy. We could predict not only the species richness, the number of different bird species, but we could also predict really strongly the actual habitat itself. So in the UK, we worked in some ancient woodland, in some regenerating rewilding project, Nep Estate, and also in a farmland, a barley farm. And then we also worked in Ecuador in the Amazon, where we similarly worked in a pristine rainforest, a regenerating forest, and in another oil palm plantation. And so we can see these gradients of ecological health, if you like. We measure that traditionally with species richness. And what we showed is that actually, if you measure calculate a bunch of acoustic descriptors that they might be familiar with in speech processing or music information retrieval, then we can really accurately predict that habitat health. With this hardware and some new mathematics, we can build a kind of stethoscope, if you like, for the planet. I think of it almost like a baby monitor, listening in to how the planet's doing, both in terms of those critical last remaining areas of wilderness and also these numerous global restoration rewilding projects that are taking place. So we want to use this technology to protect and regenerate and build evidence for these restoration programs. But actually, just listening to these soundscapes, the data itself, if you like, also helps us reconnect with the Earth. And that might sound quite sort of hippie, but I do think we need to shift from this mindset of ecosystem services, of thinking that the planet is something that we need to use and recognise ourselves as part of that larger pattern of life.
Thank you, Alice.